Great. Good morning, everyone. As always, I'm Lauren Cook, your Dean of College and Gap Year Advising. Welcome to another Coffee with Ms. Cook special edition with our college rep partners, friends, colleagues here this morning. As always, a couple of housekeeping items up top. Please stay on mute for the duration of this coffee. Our agenda this morning, as always, I've got a little content for you up top, mostly looking forward. I know we got Pesach break coming up, but a lot of things are going to happen once we're back mid-April. We'll then turn things over to our college representatives. We'll have a panel for a little bit. I've got some questions for them that they will help us navigate through, and then we will open it up for Q&A via the chat. So questions that you have, save them, pop them in there, and then I will moderate. As always, we're recording, so if you have to run, I will send a copy of this, hopefully by the end of the week, out to everyone. And as always, hour-long program, so you may have more questions than we have time for, but we will honor that 9 a.m. Stop for everyone so we can get on with our days. So, just a couple of words from me. There's probably some buzz in your house as we're getting ready for break. Maybe you're headed off somewhere. Maybe you're touring colleges. So, I hope those go well, if so. But post Pesach, as I said, it's action-packed. When we get back to school, spring college advising appointments will start with me. So this is the second one-on-one with your child, their last check-in that's required before the end of the school year. We will start those on Thursday, April 16th, and I'll send a sign-up around once we're back at school on Monday when we return. We also have the case studies program coming up on Sunday, the 19th at the University of San Francisco. As a reminder, that's a mock admission committee. And then there's a college fair in the second half this year just for kids, because I think parents were sort of hogging college rep time. So parents have the option to go to a couple of other different pieces of programming that should also be useful. There's over 100 college reps that are scheduled to come, and the invite and information should have arrived in your inbox yesterday. So please remember to RSVP. You need that Strive Scan QR code to get in. So I will send another reminder if you missed yesterday's email, but do check your inbox for that. There will also be a second questionnaire going out to your kids after break. It's the final one, but just another sort of wrap up to check in before the end of the year. And then we've got two more coffee with Miss Cooks that are coming in April and May. So on April 20th, we'll talk about gap year programs. I know I've fielded a couple of questions from folks about that, and I want you to feel informed about the options and the timeline as we move forward. And then on Monday, May 11th, we will have some 12th grade parents to chat with you about what just happened. They're not done yet, but they will be by then. So look forward to those. Keep an eye on your email and the week ahead for those invites. And yeah, let me know, of course, offline if you have any questions. So with that, we're going to transition to our college representative panel. I am always delighted to have guests for this coffee. These are, as I said, colleagues, friends of mine, partners for all of you with this process. They represent colleges that are popular with JCHS students and families. We've got kids, happy kids on all of their campuses. They also represent a real range of types of institutions that you may be looking at or still learning about. So big public research institutions, or mid-sized private college, and then a small liberal arts college for women. So a couple of different types that will be giving good information in the panel. And then, of course, these are just top-notch ethical professionals. They're seasoned. They've been in the field for a long time. So they've got years of experience to share with all of you. So I'd love to have each of you introduce yourselves. Obviously, you've written where you're at, but if there's anything, how long you've been in the field and if there's other places you worked at as well. But yeah, Gary, do you want to start us off? We'll go alphabetically.
Sure. You said season, so I was tempted to, like go off camera. I was like, she can't be referring to me. Like, I don't know who she's talking about. No, good to be here. Thanks for the invitation, Lauren. Gary Clark, Associate Vice Chancellor for Enrollment Management at UCLA. So my office oversees all the work we do in undergraduate admission, financial aid and scholarships, and some of our early academic outreach programs. I've been here going on 14 years. I was the director of undergraduate admission for 11 of those years before stepping into this role a couple of years ago, but overall been in college admission at a handful of different institutions throughout my career over the course of 28 years or so. So yeah, no, happy to be here. Look forward to answering some questions. So thanks.
Thanks. Grant.
Good morning, everyone. My name is Grant Preheim. I'm one of our Associate Directors of Admission at the University of Denver. It's my ninth year in college admissions, five of those with DU. Prior to my time with DU, I worked with the University of Oregon, Scotucks. Prior to that, I worked at the University of Kansas, Rock Chalk Jayhawk.
Thank you. And Miss Laura.
Good morning, everyone. I'm Laura Stratton, Director of Admission at Scripps College, one of the Claremont colleges down in Southern California. I've been at Scripps for almost 20 years, 18 of those as the Director of Admission. So I oversee all of our recruitment, assessing of applications, and then efforts to encourage students to choose Scripps. So happy to be here and have recruited in the Bay Area that entire time. So have been to your school many times.
Great. So we are obviously in a place where all these folks have kids researching, looking at colleges, trying to build their list. Some are feeling very focused, some are very unfocused right now and trying to figure it all out. So do you have any advice that you would give to a junior as they begin to research colleges? Things to look for, tools, questions to ask? Anyone can jump in.
I'll start. I feel like if I start with the first question, then I don't have to, go first for any of the others. So joke's on you, Gary and Grant. So I think the most I hope useful piece of advice to encourage your students is just to have an open mind. There are so many wonderful colleges and universities out there that you have not heard of and your students have not heard of. And we are very blessed in the state of California to have an amazing public school system. But there are many, many options out there. And so I think just having an open mind and, if Ms. Cook adds a school to your students list, knowing that it's for a reason and just encouraging a 17-year-old brain to actually do the research and have an open mind because I don't think that's their natural way of being. And so as the adults in the room, just to encourage them and to be on the lookout for being surprised, I think in the best way possible.
Yeah, I agree. I think I would add a practical piece of advice. And I should have mentioned I'm the father of a high school senior who is like right in the middle of all this right now. I think when it comes to the college search, I totally agree with what Laura said. I think one practical thing you can keep in mind is that for some of the schools that Ms. Cook might suggest, some of them maybe are on the tip of your tongue, some of them are not. Some of them might be local, some of them may be decidedly unlocal. Take advantage of a lot of the opportunities to kind of virtually engage with colleges and universities across the country. Because I know just based on schedules and cost and all kinds of factors, it's tough to visit all the places that you might want to visit in person. And while we would all love to have you on our campuses, sometimes that virtual engagement might give you a way to really get to know the institution a little bit. And I will tell you, one of the very thin silver linings from the pandemic is that all of us really had to kind of up our virtual game several years ago. And so the opportunities to take virtual tours and really take a fairly deep dive on a college or university now is much better than it might have been 5 or 6 years ago. So take advantage of that. And then I guess just a tip, and this is for parents, like isolate the college talks, like pick a day during the week, or like don't have it be all consuming for your student and your family, because like they're, whether they present it or not, they're carrying a lot of stress. They don't want to disappoint you, and if the conversations are always about college, 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 it's going to reduce that ability for them to actually enjoy the end of their junior year and their senior year, which I get there's going to be some stress, some of that's not avoidable, but try to make sure that you're kind of picking a day a week or something to have the college talk, so it's not all consuming. But Grant.
Yeah, Gary and Laura kind of took all the ones I was going to talk about. So I think one of the big ones, juniors are the most fun to have on our campus because it's before it gets super serious. We're not in the midst of supplemental essay writing. We're not in the midst of trying to decide financial situations between schools. So it really is just about the fit component, and I think back to Gary's point about the isolated conversations about fit, asking your students questions about do they like being in a discussion-based model of school? Would they thrive in a classroom that maybe is 400 students and still be able to seek out resources that way? Do they want to go to a football school or a hockey school? Do they want to live in a big city, college town, or a small town? So I think those reflective questions can at least get your students thinking about, maybe straying from what their friends are saying that they're going to do. And you can really start to enjoy the fun of junior year, because it gets a little more serious after this part once August 1 hits.
Thank you all. So, as we look towards the fall and starting to compile applications, and you all have just finished application reviews, some of you have just dropped decisions for the seniors. And this is a big question, but what do you consider as you're looking at applications? And is there a most important part of the application as folks are looking towards building them? Yeah.
I sound this way and go reverse
Go ahead,
order.
Grant. You
Yeah,
start.
yeah. I mean, you're going to hear the term holistic review a lot as you go through this process. With DU, we have about a 65-70% acceptance rate. So a lot of where we spend our review process is on the academic preparedness of our student body. Overall GPA is listed. Strength of curriculum is a huge component for us. Are your students taking the most difficult classes that is offered to them at school? And then any grade trends that we see. And then from there, any contextual pieces outside of it. Would they be a good fit based off the activities they're involved with? Are they involved is a big question. Were there any extenuating circumstances that impacted their academic record or maybe impacted their ability to get involved on campus? So, yeah, I'm very grateful we don't have a ton of supplements, which is awesome. But yeah, the holistic review for us really starts with the academic preparedness, and then we kind of look for contextual pieces outside of that.
Yeah, I mean, I would build on that and say, like, I think UC is a little bit different in a couple of ways. We also practice holistic admission. We do not consider or collect standardized test scores. SAT or ACT are not considered. We're test free, so there's no option to submit the scores. We don't consider standardized testing in the admission process. But the backbone of any college application at any institution I've ever worked for is absolutely the academic record. We want to see that students are doing well and doing well in a rigorous high school program, as Grant shared. I think the word that you can't describe holistic admission without using the word context, because everything is done in the appropriate context, meaning, what kind of curriculum does the school offer? When we're evaluating rigor, like some schools offer 25 plus APs, some schools offer zero, some schools limit the number of students can take in a year, some schools do dual enrollment or IB. Curriculums come in all shapes and sizes, and we don't have any preference of one over the other. We just want to see within the context of what's available to the student in their school environment, have they taken advantage of those courses and performed at a high level? That's important to us. We want to see, what students are doing outside of class, but I will share leadership doesn't always come with a title. It's not just captain of this or, the president of that. Like maybe you work part-time, maybe you take care of a family member at home, maybe you're active in a faith-based community, like whatever that may look like for you, that can present leadership and engagement. That matters to us because we're enrolling students who are going to be, we hope, engaged both in and outside of the classroom. And so we're looking for evidence that tells us this student is going to be both exciting for our faculty to teach and work with in the classroom, but students who are also going to be active in the community, active in the residential environment, good roommates, good classmates, like students like that. So we look for those kinds of things and what students share with us in the application. And for us, every application, and even as high volume as we are, every application is read at least twice by two different people before a decision is made. And those are two kind of blind reviews. Like Lauren reads it first. When I read it, I don't get to see any of her notes or anything associated with her read. So we do that to make sure we're taking as balanced an approach to the review process as we can. But Laura.
I think one thing, just to build on what Gary and Grant have shared is when I train my staff about reading, it's when you open a file, the most important thing is, will the student be academically successful and academically thrive in this particular intellectual and academic environment, right? And so we kind of know who we are. We're looking for students who align with that. And that can show up not only in the student's writing, but in letters of recommendation and how they choose to spend their time. And the other question is, what will the student pour into the community? And that is something that's really exciting for us. And if you're not quite sure, like, how would we know that, or what would we look at? For us, it's really how can we assess a student's alignment with our mission? So it's not just, do we like a student? We like a lot of students, but it is, how does the student's interests, goals, aptitudes, dreams align with what we can provide, and also what we're trying to move forward as an institution. So that's the fun detective work that we get to do when we read an application. And so in some way, it can let your student just be themselves. Because if they're themselves most fully when they're putting together an application, whether it's writing or co-curricular activities or a list building, if they're themselves and we're ourselves, all we're simply doing is looking for a match. Because not only does a student have to get into a college, they actually have to go there, right? And they have to live there and they have to be there for 4 years. And so if they're trying to be all shiny and different from who they really are, but we're taking them at their word, that's, I think, where sometimes there can be a rub. So just something to keep in mind, of maybe redirecting energy into them feeling like they are the best version of themselves that meets deadlines and proofreads and does these things, but still feels like they can be a 17-year-old version of themselves.
Thank you all. That's really great. And I think for parents, as you're continuing to do this research, Laura referenced mission statements.
Mhm.
Every college has their mission statement on their website. And sometimes I hear from kids, especially in the fall, as they sit through a couple of rep meetings at schools, and they're like, they all sound great, but they all sound alike. Well, sometimes the mission statements can help you delineate things, and colleges are very different. And so those can also be useful when they are getting to doing some of the writing in the fall and understanding what's important to that school and how to articulate the match that Laura's talking about. Gary, you had mentioned that the UCs don't take tests, which is great. But for Grant and Laura that are test optional, I believe institutions, there's a lot of, first of all, everyone, just so you know, as college reps, they're in it right now trying to find even a test sitting in the Bay Area. Very challenging right now. But as we get towards the fall and think about actually submitting scores, does it look bad if at a test optional school you don't submit your test scores? Are you considering making testing required again? What's the tea with y'all on testing right now? What's your advice? Laura?
Yeah. So I think a good question that you can ask, or just to suss out if a school is test optional, is like when they went test optional. Many colleges went test optional around COVID, and some have maintained that, some have not. The vast majority have, I will say, not the ones that maybe are in the New York Times headlines. But for Scripps, we made the decision to go permanently test optional in January of 2020. That was a decision made by our Board of Trustees with the support of our senior leadership team. And so we will remain test optional. But I think as parents and students, you can sort of see if they're even considering it just based on some of those indicators. And it's a question that any admission officer should be able to answer when they're visiting you, when they're visiting your students at the high school, at the college fair after the case studies, or when you're on their campuses. Um, I don't, I would hope that people believe us, that when we say we're test optional, we're test optional. I can only speak for myself in that I was really nervous to read without testing. I had read in a highly selective environment for 15 years with testing, and I didn't quite know what we were going to do, and I don't miss it at all. I will say, though, for students who don't submit testing, we look closely at other parts of the academic record. So, grade patterns and rigor of program, right? Because we do want to be sure that a student can be academically successful. And so looking more closely at those things. But I think when the dust settles from this year, we will have seen more students submitting testing this year than in the past few years.
It's funny that you had talked about not being able to get a test because we have a lot of California folks flying to Colorado to take testing. We see our visit numbers go up a little bit around that time, so we call them our testing tourists during that time. But yeah, a lot of flying out to visit us, and then also doing ACT or SAT. But we went test optional in 2019, so very similar to kind of when Laura went test optional. So for us, it was a 5-year study we did. Actually, our biggest thing was trying to convince faculty that we don't need it in order for them to still be good students once they get to campus and retain at a higher rate. So our study that we did showed that test scores impact first semester GPA only. And after that, it's all indicative of students' sense of belonging on campus. Are they using their academic resources? So we bought into our campus pretty early on, I'd say before it was cool for every other school to finally jump on board. But yeah, they play very little role in our mission decision. Our big saying when we are recruiting students is that we care so much more about how they do over 4 years than how they do one day in 4 hours on a Saturday morning. So, if your students feel like it reflects them as a student, they're welcome to. Since we went test optional, over 70% of our students do not submit test scores anymore. And we have a no harm policy, which that's pretty new, where if a student submits it, it's not a great score, we're not going to ding them for it. But it can only help them through the process. But it's kind of how our approach has evolved over the last 6 or 7 years.
Grant, that's so interesting. You have that no harm policy, and for families, I think that's a good conversation to have with Ms. Cook and also with admission reps because that is not what we do. So, like, if a student submits a test score and it is significantly lower than our average, once it's in and they have indicated they want to use it, we're looking at it. So that's a really, really good question because I think there could be some differentiation. And like, we don't make any assumption if you don't submit it that you weren't a good test taker for the reason that so many people can't test or they don't want to. But once we have it, we do use it.
And
Yeah,
I
I'm hearing the no harm policy more. I heard it first a couple of years ago at a University of Chicago visit.
Love
So it
that.
is kind of across the spectrum, different types of schools using it. But check me if I'm incorrect with this. But generally, I tend to look at what an admitted student average is if they've submitted testing to get a sense of what folks are submitting. And if there is a middle 50%, to get more of a range. And if a student's score is falling kind of within that middle 50%, I feel like it's probably supportive for them to send, unless it's a wild outlier from, a really, really strong academic record and feels a little bit weaker. But would you give different advice on when to submit?
Mm-mm. Other than just, I will say our averages have gone up as fewer people are submit. It's like this weird thing, right? It's like as fewer people submit, the people who do submit strategically have a higher score. It's not what the overall score profile of the student body would be, but just of those who choose to submit. So even that, I think, at least for us, has gotten a little bit skewed. And we're at about 50-50 right now.
One just quick thing I'd add from the UC perspective. Number one, I see more and more students trying to find some very kind of cute and creative way to get their scores into their UC application. Please don't do that. It doesn't matter. It doesn't play a role. Like, don't sneak it into, one of your personal insight questions or something. It's not going to make a difference. So just don't do that. And then the other thing, and this was kind of alluded to, but just remember, and this is good to check in with Ms. Cook on, like the testing policy of today is not necessarily the testing policy of tomorrow at a lot of colleges and universities. So, I think it's taking the test and just having your score and then making a determination as to whether you want to submit them to test optional schools probably makes a lot of sense because some schools, as Grant mentioned, are in like a pilot phase and may change over the course of the next couple of years. They usually give some bit of a runway there to make that announcement, but we're not making any changes anytime in the near future, but just something to be mindful of.
And I will say, because it is complicated and schools have all these varying policies, and your student may be submitting scores one place and not to another, all on the same deadlines, you'll find as we go into the fall, there are deadlines that colleges have, and there are Miss Cook deadlines. And I would really, really urge you to have your child be paying attention to the Miss Cook deadlines because I want to help them, vet things, make sure we're doing all the right things and that we are submitting what we intend to submit. Because, as Laura noted, it can be harder to pull something back once you've pushed it out there to the college, right? And so by giving ourselves usually a week's amount of time before a deadline to make sure we're thoughtfully and carefully submitting one at a time all the right things, there's much less chance of error than if they're doing it at their bedroom at 11:50 p.m. on the deadline, which, sometimes they do. They're teenagers and then the chips will fall where they may. But this is a little more complicated than it was when we were all applying. So we do need to be sort of thoughtful and plan out those submissions to be careful about it. Okay, enough about testing. But this is a good segue. What are some of the more common mistakes that you see applicants make on their applications? Are there themes? Are there things, emerging advice you can give for things to avoid?
I can start on this one. It's one of my favorite questions, particularly when it comes to essays. I mean, Laura talked about earlier, like coming as your authentic self as a student. And I think 17-year-olds sometimes have a really hard time with that self-reflection piece and turning that into a really thoughtful Common App essay or supplemental essay. So I read a lot of essays about siblings. I read a lot of essays about you all, parents, guardians. I read a lot of essays about grandmas and grandpas. And I will leave an essay and I'm like, dang, I wish grandma could come here. Or like, dang, I wish all these other things. And then I also leave that and I'm like, and I also learned nothing about the student. So I think sometimes it can be really hard to get the creative juices flowing about a student's self. And we read a lot of great essays about, or a particular event, for example. You hear the stereotype of tore my ACL and came back and won the conference championship. And so I can get very in detail about that last second goal or that last second shot that went in, especially with March Madness going on. But kind of more the takeaways from that of what you learn through that process, or how did that teach you perseverance, or how did that show a sense of resiliency that maybe differentiates you from other applicants who also experienced XYZ event or also a cool grandma that I'd love to admit. So I think from the essay piece, for a lot of schools, that is the only time we ever get to hear the student's voice. And sometimes that voice can be muted or overshadowed just because they haven't really taken the opportunity to reflect on who they are as people yet.
Yeah, I would echo that. I mean, I think my response would build on some things you've heard from us already, and that is this idea that, you know, students spend a lot of time trying to shoehorn themselves into this image of what they think a college is looking for. And look, I get it. There's a lot of mania around this, and students and families are just like, just tell me what to do and I'll do it. Like I'll check the boxes. And it's not really about that. Like I think do the things you love to do because you love to do them. The idea of a student like, dragging themselves to a service event because it's got to do this for college. It's like service is service, so I guess it's good that you're doing it regardless of your motive. But it's more of a find for students to find things that really get them excited, like things that they really enjoy, whether it's to further their learning or understanding what their academic interests might be, or just things that are just fun, like things that let them decompress and kind of get away from all the kind of pressure around this process and what they're doing in high school. And I don't like when it comes to like essay topics and things, I really don't think anything's like, I don't want to write the theater essay because everybody writes a theater essay. Well, if theater's your thing, like if that's what you're passionate about and that's the thing that really gets you excited, like that enthusiasm is what we want to kind of breathe through the essay. And so if theater is the thing that inspires that, then by all means write about theater. Like the thing that is going to come out isn't, I don't care about the theater. Like the story around the theater is just the vessel to get us to a point where we know this person a little bit better. So, just focus on that kind of authentic self and make sure you're telling your story in the way that really only you can. No outside advice, like people curating your essays too much and, AI and very, very limited structural, helpful ways, but not taking over or dominating your story. So, yeah.
So on a more practical level, I mentioned this earlier, but I can't stress it enough. The college admission process is first and foremost an opportunity to show us that your student has the capacity to meet deadlines and to give us what we asked for. So if we ask for a certain set of things, right, and it's going to be different for Gary and for Grant and for me, for the schools for which we work, please send us those things on time, um, and not more, I will say. This isn't something where more is better because then the things that we most find most helpful can get lost in the shuffle. Um, we are usually at Scripps reading about 30 applications a day as initial readers, and in committee are going through upwards of 100 a day. And so if we have too much superfluous information, it's actually less helpful. So meeting deadlines and submitting what we ask for and really doing that. The last thing I would say too in that vein is don't make assumptions that we know what certain things are that your student is involved in. So at your school, I mean, Scripps loves an acronym more than any place I've ever worked. And if there are clubs that they're involved in, if there are organizations that they're a part of, if they've taught Sunday school at Temple for the last, 4 years, that like talk about that a little bit, right? Because that the person who's opening the application may not have that reference. So adding and contextualizing things, especially on the common application, is really helpful, particularly if the file is being read by a less experienced reader. They're still trained, but we may not know exactly what something is. And Ms. Cook can guide you on how to do that and the right way in which to add in details and context. But um, I think that one of the worst things is when a student presents a file and then we just have a ton of questions, right? So we don't get to spend the time getting to know the student. We're spending the time answering the questions that maybe are not clear in the application. So those are just two practical pieces of advice.
Yeah, that's a big part of my editing with your students in the fall when we see JFCS and NCSY and Knesset and, even just some of the Hebrew words that we're using at school for things. I'm always pushing to put student government in parentheses after it. So just trying to get them to think about someone who knows nothing about your world. How can you be the most detailed and expansive in describing what we're talking about? So thank you all. That was very helpful. And as we think about essay topics, as Gary was mentioning, I will be a guest star in English classes after Pesach break when we start working on the personal narrative assignment. But some of our most successful essays, at least in terms of where admission decisions, were some very basic things. I mean, one was a student who started last year in AP Calc. It was too hard. He was lost, but he thought, I gotta take this as a junior. And it was a big ego thing for him to go down to AB Calc. And even that, was still a struggle and how he worked in it. And now this year he's in BC and it's going okay. But it was all a personal reflection on his own ego and learning and getting help and tackling hard things. A very sort of mundane high school story, but also it told you a lot about him. And it was all true. It's all his story. So some of these just slice of life things, when done well, can be very successful. Okay, so I am wondering if there are any myths about the process you would like to dispel. Anything you hear on the internet? I love the TikTok advice. Literally yesterday, someone was in my office saying, well, TikTok told me that even though this one UC I'm waitlisted at doesn't want any materials, that I should reach out and send an email and write a whole letter of continued interest. And I said, TikTok is not your college counselor. As Gary just said, don't
Please,
do
please
more.
don't.
Please,
Please,
yeah,
please don't do that thing that you just mentioned.
great. But any other myths or things you wanna mention?
Yeah, I'll jump in since I already started running my mouth. I mean, I'll start with that one. Obviously, if when students are on the wait list, I think going back to something Laura shared, like do what the college or university tells you to do. Don't do more. Don't try and find the secret code. Like there is no secret code. Do the thing that you're asked to do. For us with wait lists, it's like there's an opt-in form. It's a web form. That's it. Don't send letters of continued interest. Don't do anything outside of filling out that web form. That's it. I think when it comes to UC admission, there are a couple of things I would share. First, I think there's a perception that when you're applying to multiple UCs, your decision at one somehow influences your decision at another. I have, first of all, no knowledge of if you've applied to other UCs when you apply to UCLA, nor do I care. All I care about is your fit with UCLA, period, full stop. Like I assume you've applied to other UCs, the vast majority of students do, but I have no stake in that. Like, we're just looking at students individually. It is one UC app, but when you submit it, it goes up to the UC Office of the President in Oakland, and then they farm the data out to whatever individual campuses you've applied to. So I don't, plenty of students get admitted to multiple UCs, and one decision at one campus isn't a precursor or indicator of what the decision might be at another campus. The other thing I'll mention, because I get this question a lot, is a public university, do we somehow favor students from public high schools? We do not. We have no preference as to whether students are coming from a public school, an independent school, a parochial school, a school in Southern California, a school in Northern California. Nothing. There is no, and there's plenty of data. One of the things that, UC is great at is publishing all kinds of data that you all can look at to verify what I'm telling you. We don't have any preference of students coming from a public or an independent school, and we don't have any kind of cap or minimum on the number of students that get admitted from a school. There's no like, well, we've hit the ceiling there, so no more at that high school. It's the reality. And one quick thing specific to UCLA. UCLA is hyper selective. It is not a bragging point. That is just a data statement, matter of fact. We have last year about a 9% admit rate. So I think people sometimes see very small admit numbers and think, oh my God, it's like, well, if you had 40 applicants applying from that school and four of them got admitted, that's about right. That's the admit rate. Maybe it'll be a couple more, maybe it'll be a couple less, depending on the year, depending on the majors they're applying to. These are things that can play a role. So those are a couple quick myths I'll just address there.
Yeah, you mentioned TikTok. Facebook can also be a scary place to read about our industry, but I think one of the myths that I hear is that I think people assume that us admissions professionals are like locked in our rooms all the time and we are just reading. And we sometimes get this rep that we're Office of Rejection officers and not Office of Admission folks. We're looking for reasons to admit your student, but we're also notoriously, most of us are all extroverts. We were all the gateway to this industry is you were a tour guide, you worked in orientation, you worked in housing in college. Like we all had amazing college experiences, I hope, and wanted to continue this process for your students. So sometimes I hear that, either we're not helpful or we're not reachable, but come to your schools all the time. A lot of our schools will post, who your admissions counselor is on your page. So please feel free to reach out to us. I think that's a very underutilized resource is your admissions counselor or just the admissions office in general, especially when we're getting to the nitty-gritty of test optional versus test required and what do supplements look like at every school. It's literally what we get paid to do. So we do not want to be locked away in our offices. We do that enough when we go read. We want to be out talking with you all, doing virtual appointments, coming to your high school. So please use us.
And bonus points if your students reach out to us, right? One of the changes that I've seen over time is I would say it used to be about half parents and half students that I would communicate with either by email or by phone, and now it's almost exclusively parents. And so I would just encourage your students to take the very scary leap and reach out and to know that, as Grant says, I think particularly at schools of a certain size or culture, there is a real interest in engaging with them and engaging with them in a way that's meaningful and helpful. If it's like, tell me about your psychology department, we can answer that question, but there are also a lot of resources out there in terms of our website. And I do think that colleges are doing a better job on YouTube and short video format, which is, we know how young people live their life these days. And so I think it's utilizing those resources. But there's a wealth of knowledge in admission offices and also in financial aid offices. I know that it can be very challenging for many families to talk about the financial investment of college and what that could mean for your family, it doesn't freak us out. You're not going to tell us anything that we haven't heard before. And so I think getting the information that you need and starting that conversation is something that we really enjoy. I will say, and I know that we have joked about this, but the proliferation of students who are freshmen in college, masquerading as college counselors is really concerning to me. And we have had that happen, not as much at Scripps, but we've seen that students who were admitted to Scripps and chose not to come, or, these things having what they think of as insights. And I think that it's really dangerous because there's a level of expertise that Miss Cook has as your counselor. And that is something that's been built over many, many years. And to think that you could be a freshman in college and have that level of expertise is just, I can't think of it as anything other than being totally audacious. So just be careful, encourage your students to be careful, because I think that it can lead to a lot of heartbreak because they actually don't have any information about what we do.
You've got a great college counselor. Take advantage of that resource. It's at least part of the reason why you chose to go to this school. There's plenty of misinformation out there. And the one I hear a lot, and I'm not going to mention the name because I refuse to, but I read for a UC 5 years ago. Therefore, I've got all the inside secrets. So just be careful of all the misinformation that's out there. Go to the trusted source. That is Miss Cook. She's gonna steer you in the right direction.
Thank you all for that. I'll give you your money later. Um, and one last, and we're kind of gotten into that, but before we open it up for any last questions, do you have any parting advice that you would give to students and families as they're embarking on visits next week or, really making their lists in earnest?
Gary, I feel like we have to defer to you on this to start us because you are literally in the middle of this. I mean,
Can you even like differentiate?
Right. Right. No, it's funny. I mean, as I was approaching this year, I kept wondering, like, am I going to take all the advice I've been given over the course of my career, or am I going to turn into this different person that somehow, treats my son differently? And I'm happy to say that he's chosen where he's going to go. We all got through it like healthy and happy and not at each other's throats, and everything worked out really well. So I'm incredibly proud of him, and I think that really brings me to the advice that I would offer to you all. My son is I guess in some ways a typical teenage boy. Like he doesn't act like he's listening to me. Like he in one ear out the other. Like I'm happy if I get any acknowledgement of things I say. But the reality is, all of our kids are listening to us. They're listening to what we say. They're listening to what we don't say. They're paying attention to our body language. They're taking on the anxiety that we potentially bring to this process. So my advice is your students cannot hear often enough from you how proud you are of them, regardless of where they go to college. Like if they know that going into this process, like I'm not going to let my family down, they're going to be okay. Because they carry that weight, even if they don't say they are, they carry that weight of like, I don't want to disappoint my parents and my family. So just remind them that wherever they go, you're going to slap that bumper sticker on the back of your car. You're going to be proud of them. You're going to brag about them going to whatever institution it is that they happen to choose. And I every program I do, every time I speak, I utter the phrase, selectivity is not a proxy for quality. Do not mistake that just because a place is highly selective makes it better. That is not true. And do not assume that because a place is not highly selective, that it doesn't have an incredible educational experience to offer to your student.
And I'll be looking for that bumper sticker, Gary, wherever your son chose. But uh, you had talked about coming on visits now in the kind of this break time, and one of the biggest pieces I heard from advice from another panel I did last week was your student also has to love where they live. It's not just about the college environment, but what is there to do off campus? So if you are doing visits, try and look for something that you can do as a family, whether it's a nice little park day, maybe go to a professional sporting event, a concert, Obviously in Colorado, skiing and snowboarding is a big part of our culture. Maybe not so much this season, not great skiing, but ways that you can immerse yourself as a family in the culture of the community as well outside of the university. I think can give your student either ways to think about what are they going to do on the weekends or in the evenings, what access do they have outside of just the university culture. But also you will go back for parent weekends and homecomings and um, you know football games. So I think if you can also try and find things to do off campus while you're doing all these visits, can give a more well-rounded environment of kind of what the full 4-year experience could look like for your student and not just maybe their academic environment or the campus culture. It's a lot of pressure to put on a university for that component.
I would just say that Gary, I love what you said, and I think as a parent, and I think about that of they are always listening, is bringing a sense of like tempered enthusiasm to all things related to college admission, right? That often I think we can remind students, while it can be challenging to move through the process, the constant whipping up of how horrible it is and how stressful it is. Like for a 17-year-old mind, they will believe you, right? And so if you as trusted adults in their lives can bring a sense of like clarity and optimism, right? And excitement about the next step of their life. I have two younger children, and the decision that I made of doing this work is just whenever I talk to them about going to college, it is just about how wonderful it's going to be and what an exciting time of their life it's going to be. And I think just bringing that as they move through, I think the beginning of the process and getting them to application and decision. And then the season that we're in now, I think is being very level-headed and clear-minded about what your negotiables and non-negotiables are as a family. And that's distance and finances and, a variety of other things that will play into it. But I think just remembering that you're the grown-up in the room and that you're equipped to walk your student through this process and you have wonderful resources at your school.
Thank you all so much. Very sage, wise advice. So we've got 10 minutes or so left. What did we miss? What's on your mind? If you want to put anything in the chat, we can field a few more questions unless we covered everything, and then folks can get on with their Tuesdays. So appreciative of all three of you being here. This has been really, really helpful. We've covered a lot of ground in 40 minutes. So, yeah. Any questions? Yeah, Marty.
I have a question. I've on the tours that we've been on, and they've been a lot of fun. We've been getting a good sense of the full schools, but our son has a very specific area of study that he's interested in. Are there ways to navigate to like see more of those specific schools? Because a lot of the universities so far are doing more generalized tours as opposed to those specific departments. Or what's the best way to navigate to talk to faculty or professors or somebody in those areas?
Great. Thoughts?
I mean, I would say it depends a little bit. I mean, different colleges will have different kinds of opportunities related to what you're asking about. Obviously faculty are engaged in teaching and research and classes and may not have the time to sit down with a group of prospective students on a regular basis, but in some cases that might be available, and faculty email addresses are available and students can sometimes submit questions and get a response, and the faculty usually try to be good about providing those responses. Some of the larger universities might provide specific tours associated with schools. Like my campus, for example, I think our School of Theater, Film, and Television and Engineering and a couple of the schools do their own tours separate from our main general tour that our undergraduate admission office conducts. And there are lots of different flavors in between. I will say, and we didn't talk about summer programs at all today, and this isn't anything that really affects admission. It's just more of a developing your interest. that a lot of colleges and universities offer summer programs that might be focused in particular academic areas. So that might be a good way to kind of both get to know the school a little bit and to take a deeper dive on an academic program that might be of interest to you. But it comes in all shapes and sizes at different institutions.
I will say back to Grant's earlier point about using your admission rep as a liaison. I mean, I think reaching out to the person responsible for JCHS, San Francisco, the Bay Area, most college websites have a like find your admission counselor sort of thing to say like who could we talk to in this particular department? And then once you've connected with someone, you might find out what's available there. I know some places like University of Michigan, I've actually found has a lot of virtual events by different schools. And so you can sit in on a half an hour thing and get a real deep dive into something. Or as Gary said, some schools may do tours in particular. I was at a brunch for Southern Methodist University, which was actually, they had a whole come be Jewish on our campus brochure on Friday. But they had reps from every one of their colleges there, which was great. So I got to hear a little bit about, engineering and whatnot, and they had their cards and everything. So it depends on the school. Some it may just be more generically like a smaller liberal arts college about connecting with admission and having a one-on-one conversation. In a sort of related way, sideways, there's a question saying, Gary said choice of major affects admission. I think this can be more true at a place like a UC or the large research public institutions, but how? How does choice of major affect admission? Can you speak to that briefly?
Yeah, so again, I'm gonna give a UCLA specific answer to this question because it can be different at other UCs and certainly different at other colleges and universities. For us, the quick snapshot of this is UCLA offers about 140 plus majors. The vast majority of those majors are housed in the College of Letters and Science. If a student applies to a major in the College of Letters and Science, the major has zero impact on the admission decision. So whether they apply to biology, psychology, history, economics, undecided, has zero impact on their likelihood of being admitted. However, if a student applies to one of our specialty schools, engineering, theater, film, and television, arts and architecture, music, or nursing, then in addition to the UC app, for all of those except for engineering, there's a supplemental application that students have to fill out that goes directly to the faculty in that school where they're assessing talent, fit with program. There might be a portfolio or an audition or something like that. And they then have to recommend back to us who they're going to support for admission. So generally, if they say yes, the student's likely good to go. But if they say no, a student's academic record could light up a dark room, but if they're not supported for admission by the school based on the talent assessment, they're not going to be admitted. So the only time major plays a role for us is if a student is applying to one of those specialty schools. If they're applying to the College of Letters and Science, it's a non-factor in the review and selection process.
And I think in a more general way across other schools, when there's a popular major, and right now, nursing falls into that sort of nationally, engineering, computer science, although we're watching that wane a little bit as there's some conversations around AI and the future of coding and all of that, that just the volume of that interest in that particular major can then make it more competitive, where a number of other majors at that school, it may be, as Gary said, a non-issue. So that's another thing that we can talk about individually with your student by school, as to what they actually check off, how much that is adding an extra layer of competition or complication to their application. There's also a question, I think, about super scoring. So it says if two parts of the SAT score are combined, does it raise questions why? Grant, Laura, anything to say about that?
No, so super scoring, if folks are not familiar, means that rather than looking at the test score from one sitting of the SAT or ACT, a college will use the highest of the subscores to create a higher score. For us, we don't even look at the test date. We simply look at the subscores that come in the combined score. So I wouldn't know if they had taken the SAT once or 5 times. So that's a non-issue. Again, though, I think that it's a great question to ask individual colleges and universities. Does that have any effect for them as they're reviewing? But rule of thumb that I've heard from colleagues is that if you super score, it's because you really do want to advantage the student as much as possible if they choose to submit testing.
And then we've got a question about best practices or mistakes to avoid for students with special needs applying. And I'm assuming this is in the students that have a learning profile, that sort of regard. So disclosing, not disclosing, things to do in your application. Any thoughts on that from anyone?
I mean, I can start. I think it's an interesting question. And I will say that students disclosing learning differences is really, really common now. So it may feel for the student like, oh, I'm doing this thing and it's so scary and I'm going to tell them, I'm going to out myself in this way. We see it all the time. That's also something that I think 15 years ago versus now is very different. The same thing with mental health. And so for us, I think there has been a desensitizing process to that that is good, right? So students feel like we're getting to know them. It's not in any way seen as a concern. I always do think when a student chooses to disclose anything, the question that you can ask as their parent is why? Like, are they disclosing it because it had an effect on their academic profile, on the classes that they took? Do they want to talk about it as a growth opportunity, something they see as a superpower? There are a lot of different ways in which I think a student can disclose. What they don't need to do is to feel like in the college admission process, they have to tell us every single detail of their life. It really only needs to be if it has an effect or something that is helpful and useful in the college admission process. There's a secondary process of accommodations and getting in touch with learning services. I think of that as being different. We can direct you to those people, but in the actual application, I think the question you can ask your student is, what is the purpose of disclosing? And in doing so, how are they going to tell that story in a way that is advantageous for them?
And Grant, did you have anything to?
Yeah, absolutely. I think the reason Ms. Cook looked at me is because that's kind of what D is known for, is our learning accommodations on our campus. So since 1982, which was before the American for Disabilities Act, we started this learning effectiveness program, which offers one-on-one support for students. Now, kind of back to Laura's comment, I mean, regardless of accommodations, they're going to be met at every college campus. They have to, federally and legally. The levels of additional support look very different from school to school. And so it's about 25% of our student body that seeks accommodations, either inside or outside of the classroom. I read for the Bay Area. It's like 40 to 60% of the apps I read, someone is disclosing a learning difference or a physical disability. So I see all kind of ranges of how people disclose. Back to Laura's point also, it usually has something tied to do with their academics, whether they are a 4.0 student and they're disclosing it to show that they've been able to overcome their learning differences to be successful, or they didn't get diagnosed until sophomore year, and maybe that's why their first year grades don't look as strong, and then they either found the right medication or right tutoring services. So you are more than welcome to submit it. I would say it's so common now, and I don't think twice about it now. I'm like, oh yeah, yeah, that's part of their context, it's part of their academic history, or their life history. But you also do not have to, and we don't care regardless. But if it is something that really you feel like is a huge part of who you are and part of your student's story, please disclose it. We don't know what we don't know, so we love to see it.
And I will say that I am here to help navigate the appropriate place in the application to talk about it if they want to. Some folks, when we start doing the essays in English class in a few weeks, sometimes, the folks come straight out the gate with that topic because it feels most, at the surface and something they want to process. And then later on think, well, actually, there's a bunch more about me that I want to share. I got that out of my system. Now let's try another topic, right? And maybe it ends up being in the additional information box. It's just some contextual stuff. So we will work through this. It may be a process. And if you have questions about that or concerns, I'm here to help. So. Okay, I will name it as 9:01 a.m. We also don't have any more questions in the chat. So good job, everybody. We did it. Thank you all to Laura, to Gary, to Grant for being here this morning and sharing your expertise and your wisdom and taking an hour out to think about juniors. And now you can go back to yield events and getting all those admitted seniors in the door. And thank you to parents for being here again. And we'll get this video out later in the week. Thanks, everyone. Have a good Tuesday.